This is our Central Idea series, and we've chatted a lot about principles, theory, and designing by styles. However, there is another way to frame your thinking about achieving an amazing garden design. So we're going to create a series where the design thinking is simply based on a central idea. What do you think about that, Saj?
I think that sounds great. And I think the key idea here really is that we are all about what is the purpose of your garden. So we're thinking about not so much the traditional garden design elements, so your formal, your contemporary, your cottage. We're thinking about things that you might not necessarily find in a book or in a course, but things that you might be interested in anyway.
Great, because a garden central idea could be based on like a philosophical driver or the location of your site, or just even a principle feeling about what you want to achieve out of your garden or something you want to showcase. There's a great range in this series, and we will talk through, once we identify each central idea, we talk through that layout, the plants, materials and features that all honour that central idea.
And keep you true to your purpose. Let's go, Fleur.
Fantastic. I'm Fleur, and I'm joined by my co-host and longtime friend Sachi. We're second career landscape designers and bring our life experience and a fresh perspective to designing gardens.
And I'm Sachi, and you're listening to the On Garden Design podcast, where we chat about what makes a garden great, and we try to inspire and make designing accessible to anyone interested in gardens.
So what's the topic for today's central idea, Saj?
So today we're talking about night gardens, which is something that's a bit unusual.
So why have we decided to have a central idea based on a night garden?
Well, firstly, I think someone actually asked us to do something about night gardens. That's a very good reason to do it. But I think the other thing to think about is that sometimes it's the only time people actually, in a busy working life, have time to use their garden on a regular basis is at night. You often do entertaining at night if you are, so inclined to do that kind of thing. It's also about using your garden as an extension of your house, because you're using it into the night, whereas often you tend to sort of block the night out. And if we're being really silly about this, it's about avoiding sunburn.
Which is a very responsible thing to do in the Southern Hemisphere
particularly in Australia. That's right. That's right. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that kind of sort of odd list?
I think that's a really great list, actually, because it really is. So really this is about someone who primarily engages with their outdoor spaces at night. So we want to create a space that's entirely framed around evening or nighttime enjoyment and engagement.
That's right. So what are the key elements that you'd be thinking about for a night garden?
Yeah, so I think we need to amplify features that are particularly evocative at night. So we're looking at forms, plants and sensory stimulus.
Absolutely. And so like lighting and how light plays in a garden for me is really important in a night garden.
Yeah.
But also possibly using your sense of hearing more, because you aren't going to see as much in a night garden. So do you want to think about what other sounds you might hear or other senses you're going to get from your night garden? So hearing and also your sense of smell becomes really important.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So there's a number of different ways. Oh, and maybe the sight element in that. So you'd say with the lighting comes use of shadows.
Yeah, true.
And maybe reflective materials that bring out that sort of sense of light and
That's
play
right.
with light.
Yeah, and things that you, as you say, want to highlight versus the places you might like to leave dark, because you don't want to necessarily spotlight your utility area, for instance.
Yeah, that's right. So really we're talking about the area that you'll be more likely to use at nighttime. So it's areas that are close to the house. And that, for some sort of my initial thinking on this might be people who are more so in sort of townhouse, courtyard, balcony sort of settings, but maybe it's also quite suitable for residential, maybe even bigger spaces where there's an area that is the used at night area and it's very visible and connected to the house.
That's right. I actually think about it like that too, because a large garden is not very usable at night unless you're into, late night strolls and you've got really good wayfinding.
Oh, where I go into my garden at night time is to spot and observe the things that are eating.
Yes.
The sneakies. The snails and the grubs and slugs and things that are doing nasty things to my vegetable patch.
Well, I have to say though, just on the same note, I have a massive banksia tree out the front of my house and it's really nice at night. I always look up because I find sugar gliders, which are very cute for those people who don't know what sugar gliders are in the rest of the world. In Australia, they're like a tiny little kind of mousy thing with a big piece of loose skin between the the front and the hind legs, and they glide through the air. They leap from branch to branch, and they're very cute. So look them up, sugar gliders. We get them. They eat the nectar, I think, of the Banksia flowers. So another nice time to do a bit of spotlighting almost, which is a thing in Australia. When you're out in the bush, you tend to look up into trees to see what wildlife you can get.
There's a lot of activity at night.
There is a lot of activity at night, absolutely. So anything else we need to think about in the what?
Well, I think that probably covers it. We probably need to start getting into some of the details of how we achieve a night garden.
Absolutely. Good idea.
Where do you want to start?
Well, let's start on layout, because that's really where you first start when you're designing a garden, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking that really the layout is about, because we're creating this extension from the house, the layout's got to be conducive to the windows and the entry points coming from the house into the garden. So I'm thinking here that it's about courtyard,
yes,
or the patio, or that sort of immediate surrounds, the deck. That has got to have good access inside and outside. And so the layout is about good access directly in front of you, and seating spaces and sort of destination points that are visible and comfortable spacing from the house.
Yeah, and I'd actually say, because there's a safety element for the night thing, so you're also thinking about they're well defined, they're clear. So your paths and your areas, you're not stumbling around trying to find them. So you don't want, that little row of steppers that might be coming off your deck if it's a place that you have to go to in the night as part of your night garden. You want to make sure that you've got something sizable and you can find it easily.
Yeah. And in fact, another thing about safety is when you're outside at night, this idea of having your back to a solid wall or a hedge or something like that, where you're not feeling like you're going to be surprised from behind. And so to create a space that feels safe, that where you've got sort of good visual to the areas that you want to be engaged with, will be important.
I think that's a really good point as well. So that also probably goes a bit to how enclosed, how safe you might feel in an area at night, because that will change compared to the daytime.
Yeah.
So you probably don't want really big open spaces when you're thinking about a night garden. You do want something that's a bit more enclosed and making you feel a bit more safe and secure. So possibly thinking about your overhead and your vertical structures too a bit more in this garden.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, well then let's have a look at maybe some elements that go into the garden.
I think that sounds good. How about we think about the plants?
Sure.
As the functional, element in a night garden.
Yeah, well, for me, when you're thinking about night garden, I'm really seeing plants as giving me scent. Like,
yes,
the smell.
Fragrance,
yes.
Yeah.
Because there are many plants that really only release their fragrance at night time because they're attracting the moths of pollinators. So there's a bunch of those sort of plants, and that is part of that whole sensory evocation.
Yes.
And that's probably what I would choose a plant on.
Yeah. And I think that absolutely is a key thing. And there's some plants that you might want to focus on in this kind of way to make sure that you're actually getting, because if you have them right down the back of the garden, that's not going to help either.
Yeah.
But also, what kinds of plants might you be thinking about for scent at
There's
night?
quite a few vines that are very nice.
Yeah, there are.
Some of your jasmines. There's the night jessamine,
yes,
which is very lovely. Another one that's beautiful in the evening is the port wine magnolia.
That's exactly what I was thinking about as well. Yeah.
It's called Michaelia figo. It's not actually a magnolia, but it's just such a. I love that smell. It's people relate it to bubblegum.
Yes, that's right. Sweet. It does smell like bubblegum. Absolutely.
Have you got any favourites?
Yeah, for me, star jasmine is a big one. That is a very like you smell it during the day, but it really intensifies at night. Petunias, would you believe, are actually night scented.
Really?
Yes, you don't smell them during the day. At night, they open up a lot more. Lilies are also another one that some of the species of lilies have a much greater scent at night. Dianthus, the pinks, are also another one. And apparently phlox and sweet pea are also some that come into their own at night. What do you know?
That's a great choice. And when I hear that list, I'm thinking that you've got some climbers.
Yep.
You've got some, pretties and ones that flower, seasonal interest. So really you could have, and some of these are evergreen. So you've got a really good range of the evergreens and sort of structural plants as well as your seasonal pretties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key thing here when you're thinking about your fragrant plants, you want to be thinking where you're positioning them. So as I said, you don't want it right down the back of your garden. You actually want to have them close near your seating areas, near your windows, near your doors, so that you're actually, capturing that amazing scent that they give off at night.
Yeah. I just had another thought about using plants to make you more comfortable at nighttime. And some of the plants that repel mosquitoes, for example.
That's a good point.
So quite a few of your herbaceous perennials, things like your Tulbagia, society garlic.
Not so nice to
herbs.
smell as you're sitting in your night garden, a bit of a garlic smell.
Well, only really when you pick it.
Yeah, true.
I
Don't
guess your
crush it.
lavenders and rosemary, they're really fragrant herbaceous plants are a repellent for most of the little annoying insects.
That is very true. That's something good to think about too. The other thing though about plants and night gardens that is useful to think about is you do want to be focusing on your light coloured plants. You don't want to be thinking about, deep purples and deep pinks and that kind of, they get lost in a garden. And often the light coloured plants, so the whites, the pale colours like yellow, pink and purple, really pale, they will still give you some glow. Whatever light is around, they'll pick up and they'll reflect. So that's another thing that you want to be thinking about. And you want to be thinking about where you're positioning them. So that it might be that you position them along the edges of your paths to help define your garden a bit more at night as well. And, near your seating areas so that it's very clear that this is kind of where you want to go. So that you can use them to draw the eye as much as you need to in a night garden.
Yeah, and I know variegated plants aren't high on your priority, but that's another use where they've got that white variegation. In particular, I'm thinking sort of strappy ornamental grasses.
That's right, yeah.
Also ground covers like Lamium maculata. It's a beautiful reflection of light and just brightens up a space.
That's right. And I think even silver foliage can actually work quite well in the night garden too. If you've got, little bits of light that might be reflected, your silver plants, silver leaf plants will help. So, like your wormwood, your artemisia, I'm hopeless at that one, Dichondra silver falls, Helichrysum petiolare, Stachys even, and you've already mentioned Lamium, which I think is another good one. Yeah. So thinking about how do you bring some of that in, but you do need to still think about, you don't want everything lit up. So you don't want just your brights. You want to think about the contrast. So this is where you play with the light and the dark. So where do you need your light? Where do you want your dark? And it might be that you keep your rest of your garden quite dark and you focus your lights around the house and to help wayfind and draw your eye to particular focal points.
That sounds lovely. I've got a nice image in my mind of this collection of plants.
Excellent.
Yes.
That's good. Is there anything else about plants that we should be thinking about for a night garden?
Foliage forms. And the thing that strikes me there is when you've got an uplit plant where it's casting a shadow on a back wall or something like that, or just those, having large leaf or architecturally interesting leaves that reflect really well with with lighting on them. So this kind of goes into our conversation on lighting, but it also is about thinking about the form of the plant. So it's not all these littlies.
Yes.
We've got some strong architectural form in there to hold it all together as well.
In fact, I'd also say, though, while I agree with you, there are, and we have this in our garden because we have quite significant lighting throughout, but it's very subtly chosen. And some of the lighting that works best is actually uplighting under some of our maples where you've got a beautiful leaf shape and you get the play of the leaves on the ceiling where the light falls. And so just the shapes of the leaves can create some beautiful patterns. So thinking about, again, that play of light and dark and how you might want to use that and where you might want to use that's really important in your garden at night.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that leads really nicely into lighting. We've talked about uplighting, and that's the effects you want to create. You want to say, well, if we're uplighting, what are we trying to emphasise here? And it may be bark, it may be leaf form, shape, or it may be the shadow that's being cast on a plain wall behind it. So I really think about what's that lighting trying to achieve if you're going up.
It might also be a feature that you've got in your garden that looks really good lit at night. So you might have a quite reflective statue or, sculpture of some sort that you want to pick up. and make a feature at night as well. So I think that is also a very good use of lighting.
Yeah, there's one garden that I've been working on, and it is about night, and we're actually putting LED light underneath a big boulder. It's just on the sort of edges, and it makes it almost look like the boulder is kind of elevated a bit. It's a really special effect.
Yeah, and in fact, you've just made me think also, when we did the lighting, because we did a lot of thinking about the lighting in our garden, we actually have an LED strip around the base of our deck. So when you turn it on at night, it just casts this bit of a glow, defines the area, and it again makes it look like it's floating off the ground. It's a great effect if you can use it subtly. It's not a bright light. And I think the key thing about lights in a night garden, you're not talking about floodlights. You don't want, bright, stark light. You actually want to be very subtle about where you put your lights.
Yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, you reduce the effect of any of the lights you're using.
Yeah, that's right.
You were just turning it into a day garden.
You are, exactly.
And that's not the point of this episode.
That's right, right. But I do think you do need to think about your down lights, your up lights, your side lights, your wayfinding lights. Exactly.
Yeah, your
all
inset.
the different types of lights that you might use. Even if you've got a water feature, you might want some lights in your water feature to, shine on. If you've got some reeds or some lilies or something in there, you might also want to make some kind of feature out of those.
Definitely. And in fact, the only other form of lights that we haven't mentioned, I think, is the festoon lighting.
Oh, yes.
And if it is a kind of a fun social space, festoon lighting is really joyful.
It is. And it can be quite a gentle light compared to something that might be a brighter spotlight that, is on your table or something. You might actually want to have something that doesn't light up your table entirely, and you have some festoon lighting with some other subtle lighting around the edges rather than, the big pendant light bang on your table.
Yeah.
So it's a good way also of defining spaces at night.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
The festoon lighting.
Yeah.
So what else in terms of materials might you be thinking about for a night garden?
Well, I really like sort of reflective materials at night. Ones that, they're clearly not everything's going to be reflective. You're going to
That'd be a bit overwhelming.
That's right. So it's about choosing really discerning choice of where you have reflection. So because most of your surfaces will be, some sort of paving probably or timber. And you might have walls or hedging or something around this particular garden area, and that may not be reflective. But reflective surfaces in things like those gazing spheres, like those sort of ornamental balls that can be placed in garden beds or on the edge of a deck, and they can really play with the light. And also mirrors using still water. Polished concrete has a certain reflective effect if you've got your lighting right, and maybe light colours.
And in fact, you just triggered me. One of the things I really like in a night garden, if you've got a larger water surface that you can see the reflection of the sky and the stars at night, that's a beautiful effect. If you want something that is a bit reflective, calm, something to look at if you don't have a fire, So, I think the reflective piece is a really important one to think about. But I also want to pick up on light-coloured materials because, again, it's a really good way of making sure that you're thinking about defining the area that you might want to use at night. So you might focus more of your light-coloured materials there or on your paths if you need to be going somewhere at night. And then you might be thinking about your darker tones for those bits you want to melt away into the distance and not be a focal part or a real element within your night garden.
Yeah.
So colours are important.
Yeah. Okay, some other things that we might want to put in our night garden. I think fire tables or fire pit area.
You're a bit keen on these things, I'm getting the sense.
Well, they're quite a contemporary feature, and I find one thing I really like about the fire table is that they're clean energy. So they're usually ethanol based, and they're extremely clean. Dealing with lighting a wood fire it's kind of messy. You've
got to do something with the ash afterwards.
Yeah, which is probably good for your compost. But still, the fire table is clean and it's easy to manage. And they really look fabulous at night time. And you can have them very close to your house.
Yeah. They don't actually emit lots of heat.
No. They're really more about ambience and effect. I mean, they do emit heat, but depends on how cold your environment is. But a fire pit is something that you really don't need to have too close to your house because it's, it's smoky. But the fire table you can have really around your outdoor furniture. It becomes a sort of attractive central space for gathering, and it's something really special about looking into fire.
There is something. It's one of those things that capture your gaze, and it can be quite contemplative. It's almost like the alternative to a reflection pool of some sort. Is like your fire reflection pool.
Yeah. And it's amazing. You can spend hours outside sort of looking into a fire and having conversation gets kind of mellow and it's comfortable, and it creates this centre focal point that isn't necessarily just awkwardly looking at everyone or thinking, okay, we're done now. Fire just it sort of fills the gaps.
It does, and it means that your conversation doesn't necessarily have to continue going because it creates a much more comfortable silence, I think, if everyone's gazing into a fire. Gee, we're getting a bit deep now, aren't we?
That's right.
Are there any other features that you would be thinking about for a night garden?
Now, we've talked a little bit about water features just in terms of the reflection and that that the sort of, I guess, advantages of having a water feature. But I also want to talk about the sensory element of a water feature. The trickle and the flow, hearing a little bubbling jet, sometimes the water walls with a reflective surface behind them are really quite beautiful. So there's ways to play with water and bring in some of these other elements like reflection as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, because I was also going to go to the other sensory elements, and if you're in a place where, you quite often get breezes through, thinking about, do you want to hear rustling of, wind through trees, for instance? So do you actually have, a particular, like I'm thinking of casuarinas, which are a native Australian species. They pick up wind like pines do. So they create a rustling sound and they make a rushing sound. So if you want to emphasise some of those sounds in your garden at night, or if you want to attract some of the night pollinators, do you actually want to have some of those, do some research into what are the plants that will attract some of your night pollinators? And in Australia, you probably don't want to attract possums because they're a bit messy. So being judicious about what you're actually planting around your garden as well to attract different types of night creatures.
Yeah. Well, I think that's sort of covered most of our how, but I've got a question for you. And my quick, so did you have anything else on how to do this?
No. I think we've covered everything as well.
Great. So a question for you then is, what's the idea of a night garden during the day?
That was going to be my question as well, because I think you still do need to consider how things will look during the day. So it's actually a bit of a complex idea. You're thinking about things both as you're designing during the day and at night, which is a dimension that you don't normally think about in design. So, you don't want to have everything, that is just designed for night and then looks very average during the day.
Yeah, or that, we've got all these reflection and this light planting and light sort of walls or whatnot, but at daytime it's
glaring.
It's glaring,
yeah,
that's right. So it's really interesting to think, well, we want to maximise, this central idea is all about your experience at nighttime, but you have to consider that there will be times in the day that you'll be using it. So there'll be a lot of the principles about things like the layout, the connection to the house, the frame views that will stand whether it's day or night. But it's about finding that right balance. So think about,
that's right.
Yeah, so for our listeners thinking this one through, it's sort of find that happy medium.
And that'll be challenging because it is going to feel quite different at night than it will during the day. But I'm sure you can do it.
Of course. And it actually triggers me into thinking sort of another sort of question, and that is, then as designers, because we primarily design a garden for daytime.
We do.
When we connect with a client, it's all about how we use your garden. It's mostly about a daytime element. And so therefore, as designers, do we need to be better about thinking about really looking at that balance for certain spaces for nighttime as well?
Particularly entertaining areas, because often we will be either start during the day and go into the night, or you'll just be out there at night because that's when you have the time to do it. So I think absolutely it's probably something that us as designers need to think more about, how we are managing the transition between night and day in the garden design.
Yeah, great. Well, look, I've really enjoyed this central idea and thinking about it through just framing the thinking about the experience that you could have when you really think about designing a night garden. Did you have some key takeaways from today?
Key takeaways. I think, look, safety is one, because night gardens, you do need to think about how you're going to stumble around in the dark. I think it's really about the purpose of your garden as well. You know, your night garden is probably all about what you want to use your night garden for. Is it entertaining, or is it just to sit and look, or is it something through a window that you want to see? And then I think probably that last point that we talked about, how do you make sure it still works during the day?
Yeah, that's a great
What
point.
about you?
Well, for me, it's also about creating sort of window boxes of views from the inside and really enjoying that connection of your inside-outside living space.
I think that's a great note to end on, thinking about the connection between the inside and outside. That goes for your body too. Exactly. How does that work? Okay, we'll leave that.
Deep hydration.
Yeah, that's right. So thanks so much for listening to us again today. We hope you'll join us next time. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts, and also leave us a review. Let us know how we're going and send us a comment if you've got an idea for another central idea part of our series, and hopefully we'll hear you next time. Thanks.
Bye for now.
Bye.
You're listening to On Garden Design with Fleur and Sachi. If you're enjoying this episode, let us know by buying us a coffee through the Ko-fi link in the description of each episode. And more importantly, wherever you get your podcasts, leave us a review. We'd love to know your thoughts, and it would help us to share our podcast with others.